The crystal water glasses at Le Bernardin caught the afternoon light like trapped stars, sending fractured rainbows across the pristine white tablecloth where Marcus Sterling's manicured fingers drummed an impatient rhythm. The 62-year-old CEO of Sterling Industries adjusted his Italian silk tie for the third time in as many minutes, his steel-gray eyes scanning the restaurant's opulent interior with the calculating precision of a man who measured worth in stock portfolios and quarterly earnings. The mahogany panels seemed to whisper secrets of deals made and broken within these walls, where a single lunch could determine the fate of thousands of employees across 3 continents. Preparing and narrating this type of story took us long efforts and hard work, so if you are enjoying the story, please consider subscribing to our channel. More water, sir? The voice was young, perhaps early 20s, with a slight tremor that betrayed nervousness beneath professional composure. The waitress stood beside his table, silver pitcher poised, her uniform crisp despite the lunch rush that had tested even the most seasoned servers. Her name tag read Elena Kowalczyk, the letters etched in elegant script against the brass background. Marcus glanced at her name tag and let out a sharp laugh that cut through the ambient murmur of conversation like a blade through silk. Kowalczyk? He pronounced it deliberately wrong, adding unnecessary consonants, turning the proud Polish surname into something that sounded like a cat choking on a hairball. Good God, did your parents lose a bet with a Scrabble board? How does anyone even pronounce that disaster of a name? The pitcher trembled slightly in Elena's hands, but she maintained her composure, her hazel eyes flecked with gold that seemed to dim at his words, remaining professionally neutral. Around them, other diners glanced over, some with disapproval, others with the uncomfortable silence of those who recognized Marcus Sterling and knew better than to intervene. A woman at the adjacent table, her pearl necklace catching the light, shifted uncomfortably in her seat, her lunch companion suddenly fascinated by his soup. "It's pronounced Kowalczyk, sir," she said quietly, her voice steady despite the flush creeping up her neck like watercolor paint bleeding across canvas. "It means blacksmith in Polish. My great-grandfather brought the name with him through Ellis Island in 1923, along with nothing but the clothes on his back and a determination to build something meaningful in America." Marcus waved his hand dismissively, the gesture sending ripples through the air, as if he could physically push away her family history. "Spare me the immigrant sob story. Maybe if your family had spent less time being proud of unpronounceable names and more time actually accomplishing something, you wouldn't be here pouring water for people who actually matter." He turned to his lunch companion, Richard Brennan, the CFO of Sterling Industries, who sat frozen with his fork halfway to his mouth, clearly uncomfortable, but unwilling to challenge his boss. "You know what I always say, Richard? Names like that, they're anchors. They drag people down, mark them as perpetual outsiders. In business, you need a name that opens doors, not one that makes people need a linguistics degree just to address you." Marcus's voice carried across the restaurant, deliberately loud, deliberately cruel. The imported marble floors seemed to amplify his words, bouncing them off the vaulted ceiling adorned with a Venetian glass chandelier that had witnessed countless power plays, but rarely such casual cruelty. Elena's free hand clenched at her side, her knuckles white against the black fabric of her uniform. For a moment, something flashed in her eyes, not just hurt, but a deep, burning intelligence that seemed incongruous with her current position. She opened her mouth as if to speak, then closed it, professionalism warring with personal dignity. The pendant at her throat, a small silver hammer that had belonged to her great-grandfather, caught the light as she breathed deeply, centering herself. "Will there be anything else, Mr. Sterling?" she asked, her voice controlled but carrying an undertone that Richard Brennan, more perceptive than his boss, caught immediately. There was steel beneath the service industry smile, the kind of strength forged through generations of hardship and triumph that Marcus Sterling, born into privilege, could never understand. Before Marcus could respond, the restaurant's heavy oak door swung open with unusual force, causing the maitre d' to look up in surprise. An elderly man entered, moving with the careful dignity of age but with eyes that burned with youthful intensity. He was impeccably dressed in a charcoal suit that, while not as expensive as Marcus's, was worn with a gravitas that made it seem priceless. His hair was silver white, swept back from a face marked with laugh lines and worry furrows in equal measure. The man's gaze swept the restaurant and landed on Marcus's table. For a fraction of a second, his eyes met Elena's, and something passed between them, a recognition, a warning, or perhaps a promise. Then he was moving towards them with purpose, his leather shoes clicking against the marble with metronomic precision. "Mr. Sterling?" the man said as he approached, his voice carrying an Eastern European accent that had been softened but not erased by decades in America. "I am Viktor Kowalczyk. I believe we have a meeting scheduled for this afternoon to discuss the merger that will determine the future of both of our companies." The water pitcher in Elena's hands might as well have been a bomb, for the way the table suddenly froze. Marcus's face, moments before flushed with arrogant amusement, drained of color like water from a broken dam. Richard Brennan's fork clattered to his plate, sending a small spray of sauce across the pristine tablecloth. The ambient noise of the restaurant seemed to fade to a whisper, as if even the walls were holding their breath. Viktor Kowalczyk, founder and CEO of Kowalczyk Technologies, the company Sterling Industries desperately needed to merge with to survive the current market downturn, stood beside his granddaughter with the quiet authority of a man who had built an empire from nothing. The same surname Marcus had mocked moments before was embossed in gold on the business card Viktor now placed on the table with deliberate slowness. Elena stood perfectly still, the water pitcher steady in her hands now, her earlier trembling replaced by a composure that seemed to emanate from her grandfather's presence. The resemblance between them was subtle but unmistakable. The same intelligent hazel eyes, the same determined set to their jaw, the same quiet strength that Marcus had mistaken for weakness. "I see you've already met my granddaughter," Viktor said, his tone conversational, but carrying an undercurrent sharp enough to cut glass. "Elena is working here part-time while she completes her MBA at Wharton. She wanted to understand business from every angle, including how people treat those they perceive as beneath them. It's a lesson, Mr. Sterling, that I taught her myself, having once washed dishes in a restaurant, not unlike this one, while building the company that now holds the patents your survival depends upon." The silence that followed was deafening. Around them, other diners had given up any pretense of not watching, their meals forgotten as they witnessed what would later be whispered about in boardrooms and country clubs for months to come. The chandelier above cast shadows that seemed to dance with dark amusement, and somewhere in the kitchen, unaware of the drama unfolding, a chef called out an order in French, the normalcy of it highlighting the extraordinary nature of the moment. Marcus's mouth opened and closed soundlessly, his usual eloquence deserting him like rats from a sinking ship. His mind raced, calculating the catastrophic implications of his casual cruelty, the millions of dollars hanging in the balance, the board members who would crucify him if this deal fell through. But more than that, for perhaps the first time in his life, he was confronted with the human cost of his arrogance, embodied in the young woman still standing beside his table with a dignity he had tried and failed to diminish. Viktor's gaze moved between Marcus and Elena, taking in the scene with the analytical precision of a man who had survived too much to be surprised by human nature's capacity for both cruelty and cowardice. "Elena," he said softly, his voice carrying a warmth that transformed his stern features. "Perhaps you should take your break now. Mr. Sterling and I have much to discuss." As Elena set down the water pitcher with deliberate care, the soft clink of silver against wood seemed to echo like thunder. She removed her apron with movements that were graceful and unhurried, folding it with the same precision her grandfather applied to multi-million-dollar deals. When she looked at Marcus one last time, there was no triumph in her eyes, only a kind of sad understanding that made him feel smaller than any boardroom defeat ever had. "Enjoy your lunch, Mr. Sterling. I hope it was worth it." The weight of her words settled over the table like ash from a distant fire. Viktor watched his granddaughter walk away with evident pride, her spine straight despite the emotional toll of the encounter. She moved through the restaurant with the same grace she'd maintained while being humiliated, but now there was something different in her bearing. A validation, perhaps, or simply the relief of a mask being lifted. "Shall we sit?" Viktor asked. Though he was already pulling out the chair Richard Brennan hastily vacated, the CFO mumbling something about needing to make a phone call. Richard's departure was more of a flight, his usually composed demeanor cracked by the witnessing of what he knew was a career-defining disaster for his boss. As he passed the maitre d', Richard whispered something urgently, and within moments, the surrounding tables began to empty as staff discreetly suggested alternative seating to give the two titans privacy for what was sure to be a memorable conversation. Viktor settled into his chair with the careful precision of a chess master positioning his pieces. From his breast pocket, he withdrew a pair of wire-rimmed spectacles, cleaning them slowly with a monogrammed handkerchief. The gesture was unhurried, deliberate, forcing Marcus to sit in the uncomfortable silence of his own making. The restaurant's ambiance had shifted palpably, where before there had been the cheerful hum of successful people celebrating their success, now there was the charged atmosphere of a courtroom awaiting a verdict. "You know, Mr. Sterling," Viktor began, his accent giving his words a musical quality that did nothing to soften their edge. "When I was 7 years old, I watched my grandfather, Elena's great-great-grandfather, have his blacksmith shop burned to the ground by people who thought his name, his accent, his very existence was offensive to their sensibilities. He rebuilt it with his bare hands, working 18-hour days, his skin scarred from the forge, his back bent from the labor, but he never changed his name, never apologized for who he was. Mr. Kowalczyk, Marcus found his voice, though it came out rougher than intended, like words dragged across gravel. "I am not finished," Viktor interrupted, his tone still conversational but brooking no argument. "That man, whose name you found so amusing, held 17 patents by the time he died. His innovations in metallurgy are still used in the aerospace industry today. His son, my father, took those patents and built a small manufacturing company that survived the Depression, 2 wars, and countless economic downturns.
And I, the grandson of that unpronounceable immigrant, built that company into a technology empire that your board of directors is currently salivating over." The waiter, who had taken over Elena's section, approached cautiously. Clearly having been briefed on the situation, Viktor ordered a simple lunch, soup and salad, while Marcus found himself unable to even look at the menu he'd been studying with such satisfaction mere minutes ago. The leather-bound pages felt like they contained accusations rather than appetizers. "But Elena," Viktor continued, his voice softening with grandfatherly affection, "Elena is perhaps the greatest of us all. Summa cum laude from Princeton at 20, youngest person ever admitted to Wharton's executive MBA program, She speaks 7 languages, has published 3 papers on ethical business practices, and last year she turned down offers from Goldman Sachs and McKinsey to help me prepare Kowalczyk Technologies for its next phase. She chose to work here, in this restaurant, 3 days a week, not because she needed the money, but because she wanted to understand every level of the American economy, to never forget what her great-great-grandfather knew, that dignity exists at every level of honest work. Elena Kowalczyk's alarm pierced the pre-dawn darkness at 4:47 a.m., 3 minutes before its scheduled time, as always. Her internal clock, refined by years of discipline, never let her sleep until the alarm's actual summons. She lay in the darkness of her studio apartment in Philadelphia's Rittenhouse Square, a space she could easily have upgraded with her family's wealth, but chose to maintain as a reminder of the struggle that shaped her ancestry. The walls were adorned not with expensive art, but with black and white photographs. Her great-great-grandfather at his forge, her great-grandfather's naturalization certificate, her grandfather as a young man standing before his first factory, and her parents on their wedding day, her mother in a simple dress that Elena now kept preserved in tissue paper in her closet. The wooden floorboards, original to the 1920s building, creaked familiarly as she padded to the kitchen. The morning ritual was sacred. Turkish coffee prepared in the same copper sezve her great-grandmother had carried from Poland, its surface worn smooth by generations of handling. As the coffee slowly heated, she opened her laptop to review the previous night's work, a financial analysis of potential merger structures that would have impressed any Wall Street veteran, though she was still technically a student. The steam from the coffee carried the scent of cardamom and memories. She thought of her grandfather, probably already awake in his Gladwin mansion, reviewing the same documents. They had developed their strategy together over the past 6 months, anticipating Sterling Industries' approach with the patience of hunters who understood their prey. Marcus Sterling's company was hemorrhaging talent and market share, their old-fashioned business model crushed under the weight of modern innovation. They needed Kowalczyk Technologies' patents and, more importantly, its vision for the future. But Elena and Viktor agreed that the merger would only happen if Sterling Industries underwent a fundamental cultural transformation. Elena's phone buzzed with a text from her study group at Wharton. They were meeting at 6 a.m. to review case studies, and she was responsible for leading the discussion on ethical leadership in crisis management. The irony wasn't lost on her as she gathered her materials, leather portfolio worn at the edges from use, laptop covered in stickers from various business conferences and social justice organizations, and a thermos of coffee that would sustain her through the morning's intellectual marathon. The walk to campus took her through Washington Square Park, where the homeless veterans she'd come to know by name were beginning their day. She stopped, as always, to chat with Raymond, a Vietnam veteran whose strategic mind, despite being clouded by PTSD and circumstances, still occasionally produced insights that found their way into her class discussions. "Morning, Elena," Raymond called out, his voice gravelly but warm. "You look like you're carrying the weight of the world again." "Just a few corporations, Ray," Elena replied, handing him a coffee and the sandwich she had prepared. It was their ritual, this exchange of sustenance for wisdom. "Tell me, what do you do when someone shows you exactly who they are?" Raymond's weathered face cracked into a knowing smile. "You believe them the first time, young lady, but you also give them a chance to show you who they could become. That's the difference between justice and revenge." His words echoed in her mind as she entered the Wharton building, its modern glass and steel architecture a testament to forward-thinking design. Her study group was already assembled in their usual conference room, 5 other ambitious minds who would one day run corporations, governments, or NGOs. There was David Chen, whose family had built a shipping empire from a single boat, Sarah Williams, a former Army captain using her GI benefits to transition from military to corporate leadership. James Thompson, a second-generation tech entrepreneur who openly admitted he was there to learn how not to repeat his father's mistakes. Maria Santos, whose nonprofit work in microfinance had caught the attention of the World Bank. And Thomas Barrett, the son of a senator who was determined to prove he was more than his last name. "Elena, you look like you haven't slept," Sarah observed with military directness. "Everything okay?" Elena settled into her chair, her mind still partially occupied by the anticipated afternoon meeting between her grandfather and Sterling Industries. "Just processing some real-world applications of what we're studying. You know how Professor Martinez always says that business ethics aren't theoretical until they cost you something? I'm watching that play out in real time." The case study they were reviewing involved a company whose CEO had created a hostile work environment through systematic discrimination. The parallels to Sterling Industries weren't exact, but they were close enough that Elena found herself contributing insights with unusual passion. She spoke about the corrosive effect of leadership that devalued human dignity, how it spread through an organization like cancer, destroying not just morale, but innovation, creativity, and ultimately, profitability.
"You're taking this personally," David observed during a break, his perceptive eyes studying her over his coffee cup. "This isn't just academic for you." Elena considered her words carefully. These were her peers, future allies in the business world, but the situation with Sterling was still confidential. "My family's company is in negotiations with a firm that, let's say their culture is problematic. We're trying to decide if change is possible or if some things are too broken to fix." "Everything can be fixed with the right leadership," James interjected with the confidence of someone who'd never encountered true institutional rot. "It's just a matter of incentives and consequences." "But what about the human cost during the transformation?" Maria challenged. "How many good people get destroyed while you're waiting for the bad actors to reform?" The debate that followed was intense and illuminating, each student bringing their unique perspective to bear on the question. Elena took notes, not for class, but for the strategy session she would have with her grandfather that evening. Every insight, every argument, was potential ammunition for the battle she knew was coming. After class, Elena made her way to Le Bernardin for her lunch shift. The restaurant job had begun as her grandfather's suggestion, a way to understand service, humility, and the perspective of those often overlooked in boardrooms. But she'd grown to appreciate it for its own sake. The precision required, the ballet of coordination between kitchen and floor, the immediate feedback of customer satisfaction or dissatisfaction. It was business stripped to its essential elements. Her manager, Philippe Dubois, a French expatriate who'd worked in Michelin-starred restaurants across Europe, greeted her with his usual combination of warmth and exacting standards. "Elena, you're on Section 3 today. We have the Sterling Industries lunch at Table 7. Elena's heart rate quickened, but she kept her expression neutral. "Any special requirements?" "The usual. Mr. Sterling likes to make an impression on his guests. Ensure everything is perfect, but be invisible. You know how these types can be. They want flawless service while pretending the servers don't exist." The irony was sharp enough to cut. Elena nodded, tying her apron with steady hands despite the adrenaline coursing through her system. She'd known this was coming. Her grandfather had informed her of the lunch meeting scheduled before their official afternoon conference. It was Viktor's way of teaching a lesson that would extend beyond Sterling to every executive who would hear this story. And they would all hear it. Viktor would make sure of that. The lunch rush began, and Elena fell into the rhythm of service. She moved through her section with practiced efficiency, taking orders, delivering plates, refilling glasses, all while part of her mind ran through financial projections and merger scenarios. The other servers respected her work ethic, even if they didn't understand why someone with her education chose to be there. Manuel, a career waiter who'd been at Le Bernardin for 15 years, often said she had the best hands in the business.
steady, quick, and graceful under pressure. "You're somewhat else today," observed Claire, another server, as they waited for orders at the pass. Claire was a single mother working her way through nursing school, and she and Elena had formed a friendship based on mutual respect for each other's struggles. "Big test coming up?" "Something like that," Elena replied, watching as the kitchen staff plated dishes with artistic precision. "A real-world examination where the stakes are a bit higher than a grade." "Well, whatever it is, don't let it get in your head. You've got that look, like you're playing chess while the rest of us are playing checkers. My grandmother used to get that look before she'd destroy my grandfather at cards." Elena smiled, thinking of her own grandfather and the patient way he taught her to see 3, 4, 5 moves ahead in both chess and business. "Your grandmother sounds like she was a wise woman." "Still is, 93 and sharp as a deck. She says the secret to winning isn't being smarter than your opponent, it's letting them think they're smarter than you until the moment they realize they're not." The wisdom of grandmothers, Elena thought, transcending culture and circumstance. She was still contemplating this when Marcus Sterling walked in, his presence commanding attention like a stone dropped in still water. The transformation in the restaurant's atmosphere was subtle but noticeable. Servers stood straighter, the maitre d' became more obsequious, and even the ambient conversation seemed to quiet slightly. Elena watched from the service station as Sterling was seated, noting the way he surveyed the room like a feudal lord reviewing his domain. His companion, Richard Brennan, looked uncomfortable, constantly checking his phone and adjusting his tie. She'd researched both men extensively. Sterling's rise from middle management to CEO through a combination of strategic marriages and hostile takeovers. Brennan's reputation as a numbers man who could make any balance sheet sing but lacked the spine to stand up to his boss's worst impulses. She gave them 5 minutes to settle, reviewing the menu and discussing what she could only assume were the preliminary terms of the merger they believed was a done deal. Then, with the same steady hands that had served hundreds of difficult customers, she picked up the water pitcher and approached table 7. Each step was measured, deliberate. She thought of her great-great-grandfather approaching his forge each morning, of her grandfather walking into his first board meeting, of her mother standing before a judge to argue her first case as an immigration lawyer. She thought of all the names on all the documents that had been mocked, mispronounced, dismissed, and how each bearer of those names had persisted nonetheless. "Good afternoon, gentlemen," she said, her voice carrying the professional warmth she'd perfected over months of service. "Welcome to Bernardin. May I start you with some water?" The aftermath of that initial water service rippled through Elena's consciousness like a stone disturbing still water. As she stood beside their table, pitcher poised, she could feel the weight of Marcus Sterling's gaze, dismissive, calculating, already categorizing her as insignificant. It was a look she'd encountered before in various forms, from venture capitalists who spoke over her at conferences until they learned her last name, from classmates who assumed she was there on a diversity scholarship rather than merit, from clients at the restaurant who saw the uniform before the person. "Still water or sparkling?" she asked, maintaining her professional composure even as she felt Sterling's eyes linger on her name tag with visible amusement. The brass badge had been her choice. Felipe had offered to let her use just her first name, but she'd insisted on displaying her full surname. It was a small act of defiance, a daily reminder that she would never apologize for who she was. "Still," Sterling replied curtly, then turned to Brennan with a smirk playing at the corners of his mouth. "Though, with a name like that, I bet she makes everything complicated." The first cruelty was always the testing ground. Elena had observed this pattern in bullies throughout her life. The initial probe to see if their target would respond, would fight back, would crumble. She poured the water with steady hands, the liquid catching the light as it filled the crystal glasses. Not a drop spilled, not a tremor showed. "Will you need a few more minutes with the menu?" she asked, her tone neutral, professional, giving nothing away. Sterling didn't even look at her as he responded. "Obviously. And make sure the kitchen knows I have specific requirements. No substitutions, no creative interpretations. I want exactly what I order, exactly how I order it. Can you handle that? Or do I need to speak to someone with more linguistic capability?"
Brennan shifted uncomfortably, his eyes darting between Sterling and Elena. "Marcus, I think you think too much, Richard. That's always been your problem. Success in business requires decisive action, not overthinking. Isn't that right, Miss Kowals?" He deliberately butchered her name, drawing out each mispronunciation like a cat playing with wounded prey. "Kowalczyk," Elena supplied evenly, "and I'll ensure the kitchen receives your preferences, Mr. Sterling." As she walked away, she heard Sterling's voice carry across the restaurant. "You see that, Richard? That's the problem with this country now. We celebrate mediocrity, pretend that everyone's equal, when clearly some people are just meant to serve while others are meant to lead." At the service station, Manuel noticed her controlled breathing, the way she gripped the edge of the counter for just a moment before composing herself. "You okay, mija?" he asked quietly, using the endearment he reserved for moments when the job demanded more than it should. "I'm fine," Elena replied, though her mind was racing. She knew her grandfather would arrive soon, knew the carefully orchestrated revelation that would follow, but enduring Sterling's casual cruelty, even temporarily, even strategically, felt like swallowing broken glass. The lunch service continued, and with each interaction, Sterling's behavior escalated. When she brought their appetizers, he made a show of examining the plates as if searching for flaws, loudly discussing with Brennan how people with unpronounceable names probably came from countries where food safety standards were questionable. When he refilled their water glasses, he pulled his hand away dramatically as if afraid of contamination, joking that he hoped he had washed his hands properly, considering where her people probably came from. Each comment was carefully calibrated to be offensive while maintaining plausible deniability. It was the kind of soft bigotry that flourished in corporate boardrooms and country clubs, where prejudice wore a suit and smiled while it destroyed careers and crushed spirits. Elena had studied this phenomenon in her business ethics courses, but experiencing it firsthand, even when she knew justice was coming, made her understand why so many people simply gave up fighting.
Claire passed by with a tray of desserts, catching Elena's eye with a look of sympathy and anger. The entire staff had noticed Sterling's behavior, the way his voice carried deliberately, the way he seemed to take pleasure in his small cruelties. Philippe, usually invisible during service, had emerged from his office twice to observe, his expression growing darker with each overheard comment. "Table 12 wants to send their compliments to the server at table 7, Claire whispered as she passed. "Mrs. Rothschild says you're handling yourself with more grace than that man deserves." Elena glanced at table 12, where an elderly woman in pearls and her younger companion, likely her daughter, were watching with evident disapproval. Mrs. Rothschild, a regular, had always been kind to the staff, but Elena had never seen her look quite so fierce. It was a small comfort, this silent solidarity from strangers. The main courses arrived, and Elena delivered them with the same professional precision she'd maintained throughout the ordeal. Sterling had ordered the most expensive item on the menu, the chef's tasting menu with wine pairings, while Brennan had chosen a simple salad, his appetite apparently diminished by his boss's behavior. "I hope everything is prepared to your satisfaction, Mr. Sterling," Elena said as she placed the plate before him. Sterling examined the dish with theatrical scrutiny. "We'll see, though I have to wonder about the hygiene standards here if they're hiring people who can barely speak English properly." "I speak 7 languages, actually," Elena replied before she could stop herself. The words hung in the air like a challenge. Sterling's eyes narrowed, his fork pausing halfway to his mouth. "Excuse me? You expressed concern about my linguistic capabilities. I thought you should know that I speak English, Polish, French, Spanish, Mandarin, German, and Russian. I find that linguistic diversity is quite useful in our globalized economy." The silence at the table was deafening. Brennan looked like he wanted to disappear into his chair, while Sterling's face flushed red, the color climbing from his collar to his hairline. Around them, other diners had stopped pretending not to notice the exchange. "I don't recall asking for your resume, and I certainly didn't ask for attitude. Perhaps you should fetch your manager if you can't maintain appropriate professional boundaries." "Of course, Mr. Sterling," Elena replied. But before she could move, the restaurant's atmosphere shifted again. Viktor Kowalczyk had arrived.
Elena watched her grandfather enter with the timing of a maestro conducting a symphony. He paused at the entrance, allowing the maitre d' to take his coat, his presence commanding attention without effort. Several diners recognized him. His photo had been in the Wall Street Journal just last week, accompanying an article about innovative tech companies reshaping American industry. Viktor's path to our table wasn't direct. He stopped to greet Mrs. Rothschild, bending to kiss her hand in an old-world gesture that made her smile. He exchanged words with a young entrepreneur at the bar who practically glowed at the recognition. Each interaction was genuine but also strategic, building an audience for what was to come. Elena began to step away, but Viktor's voice stopped her. "Elena, my dear, don't leave on my account." The words cut through the restaurant's ambient noise like a knife through silk. Sterling's head snapped up, his eyes darting between Viktor and Elena, the gears in his mind visibly turning as he tried to process the connection. "Mr. Kowalczyk," he stammered, rising from his chair so quickly he nearly knocked over his wine glass. We weren't expecting you until our 3 o'clock meeting," Viktor supplied smoothly. "Yes, I know, but I always like to arrive early for important negotiations. It gives me a chance to observe the character of potential partners. Character, Mr. Sterling, is something that reveals itself most honestly when people believe no one of consequence is watching." The weight of the words settled over the table like a shroud. Brennan had gone pale, his tablet clutched in his hands like a life preserver. Sterling's face opened and closed soundlessly, his usual eloquence deserting him entirely. "Elena," Viktor continued, his voice gentle but carrying steel underneath, "why don't you take your break now? I believe Mr. Sterling and I have much to discuss." As Elena removed her apron, she caught sight of Philippe standing near the kitchen entrance, his expression of one of grim satisfaction. Manuel gave her a subtle thumbs up, while Claire looked like she was witnessing the best drama of her life. The entire restaurant, it seemed, had been holding its breath.
"Before you go," Viktor added, "perhaps you could bring Mr. Sterling and Mr. Brennan fresh water. I have a feeling their mouths have gone quite dry." Elena retrieved the pitcher one more time, filling their glasses with the same steady hands that had endured Sterling's abuse. As she poured, she made eye contact with Sterling, not triumphant, not vengeful, but steady and unflinching. It was the look of someone who had been tested and not found wanting, who had endured insult with dignity and would now watch justice unfold with the same composure. "Your water, Mr. Sterling," she said quietly. "I hope it's to your satisfaction." Sterling couldn't meet her eyes. His hand trembled as he reached for the glass, the water sloshing dangerously close to the rim. In that moment, he looked older, smaller, diminished in the way that no hostile takeover or board coup could have achieved. As Elena walked away, she heard Viktor begin to speak, his accented voice carrying the weight of history and hard-won success. "Now then, Mr. Sterling, let's discuss this merger you're so eager to complete. But first, I think we need to establish some ground rules about corporate culture and the treatment of employees. You see, at Kowalczyk Technologies, we believe that every person, regardless of their position, their name, or their heritage, deserves respect. It's not just good ethics, it's good business. Innovation comes from diverse voices, from people who feel valued and heard. Companies that forget this truth, that treat people as lesser based on prejudice and assumptions, they don't just fail morally, they fail financially." Elena paused at the staff door, looking back one more time. Sterling sat hunched in his chair, his earlier arrogance evaporated like morning mist. Brennan was furiously taking notes, probably already calculating the damage control needed. And Viktor, her grandfather, sat with the quiet confidence of a man who had waited patiently for justice and found it served at exactly the right temperature. The kitchen was buzzing when she entered,
the story having already spread among the staff. The head chef, Jean-Pierre, a man who rarely showed emotion beyond frustration at imperfect plating, actually applauded when she walked in. "Magnifique," he declared. "To see that pompous fool brought low, it is better than any dessert I could create." But Elena felt no satisfaction, only a deep weariness. She thought of all the people who faced Sterling's type of casual cruelty every day, without a powerful grandfather to intervene, without the protection of wealth and education, without recourse or justice. Her phone buzzed with a text from her mother. "Dad told me what happened. I'm proud of you for maintaining dignity. Remember, this isn't just about Sterling. It's about changing a system." Her mother was right, as usual. Dr. Anna Kowalczyk, née Chen, had faced her own battles as a Chinese-American woman in law, fighting for immigrant rights in courtrooms where she was often the only person of color. She taught Elena that individual victories meant nothing if they didn't translate to systemic change. Elena found a quiet corner in the break room and opened her laptop. The merger documents were all there, waiting for review. But now she saw them differently. Not just as financial instruments, but as tools for transformation. Every clause, every provision, every requirement could be crafted to ensure that Sterling Industries would have to change, really change, not just in policy, but in culture. She began typing notes, her fingers flying across the keyboard. Mandatory diversity and inclusion training for all executives with progress tied to compensation. Third-party audits of workplace culture. Employee resource groups with direct access to the board. Zero-tolerance policies for discrimination with teeth. Real consequences, not just warnings. Her phone rang. It was her grandfather. "Are you all right, Kuchani?" Viktor's voice was tender, using the Polish endearment he'd called her since childhood. "I'm fine, Jadek. How's the meeting going?" Preparing and narrating this type of story took us long efforts and hard work. So if you are enjoying the story, please consider subscribing to our channel. Mr. Sterling is learning that actions have consequences. He's also learning that Kowalczyk Technologies has 3 other suitors for this merger, all of whom would treat our legacy and our people with respect. I could hear Sterling's voice in the background, pleading, the words indistinct but the tone unmistakable. Desperation mixed with barely controlled panic. "Don't torture him too much," Elena said, though part of her felt Sterling deserved every moment of discomfort. "Torture? No, my dear. This is education. Mr. Sterling needs to understand that the world has changed, that the old boys' club where he learned his values is dying. He can either evolve or become extinct. The choice is his."
After they hung up, Elena remained in the break room, processing the afternoon's events. Sophie, one of the younger servers, poked her head in. "Elena, there's a woman at table 12 who wants to speak with you, Mrs. Rothschild." Elena found the elderly woman finishing her lunch, her daughter beside her. Mrs. Rothschild's eyes, bright blue and sharp despite her age, fixed on Elena with an intensity that was almost unsettling. "Sit, dear," Mrs. Rothschild commanded, and Elena, despite technically being on break, obeyed. "I knew your great-grandmother. Did you know that?" Elena's eyes widened. No, I didn't." "Katarzyna Kowalczyk. We worked together at a textile factory in 1954. I was Rebecca Goldstein then, fresh off the boat from Germany. Your great-grandmother was the only one who would eat lunch with me. The others, they saw my number." She unconsciously touched her left forearm where Elena knew the tattoo would be, and kept their distance. But Katarzyna, she said anyone who survived what I survived deserved friendship, not fear. Mrs. Rothschild's daughter reached over to squeeze her mother's hand, a gesture of support Elena recognized from her own family's navigation of difficult histories. "She taught me English, helped me understand American customs. When I got married, she made my wedding dress with her own hands because we couldn't afford to buy one. I named my first daughter Catherine, the American version of Katarzyna. Elena felt tears prick at her eyes. Another layer of history, another connection she hadn't known existed. What that horrible man did today, people like him did to our families for generations. But you stood there with such dignity, just like your great-grandmother would have. She'd be so proud. Thank you, Elena managed, her voice thick with emotion. Don't thank me. Just promise me something. When you're running companies, and you will be, remember those of us who served water and sewed dresses and built this country with our hands. Don't let them be invisible. I promise, Elena said, and meant it. When she returned to the main floor, the atmosphere had changed completely. Sterling and Viktor were gone, but the energy of what had transpired lingered. Servers moved with an extra bounce in their step, and even the usually stoic Philippe was smiling. They left you something, Claire said, handing Elena an envelope that had been left at the table. Inside was a check from Sterling, a $1,000 tip, and a note in shaky handwriting. I apologize for my behavior. It was inexcusable. Marcus Sterling. Elena stared at the check, then deliberately tore it in half. He thinks he can buy absolution with money? She said to Claire. That's part of the problem. Girl, that's $1,000! And accepting it would mean what he did was transactional, that there's a price for dignity. There isn't. Elena dropped the pieces in the trash. Besides, if the merger goes through, Sterling Industries will be implementing a company-wide minimum wage of $25 an hour. That's worth more than any tip. The rest of her shift passed in a blur. Word had spread beyond the restaurant. Someone had recorded part of the interaction and posted it on social media. Elena's phone buzzed constantly with messages from classmates, from contacts in the business world, from journalists wanting statements. She ignored them all, focusing on her remaining tables, on providing the same excellent service she always did. As her shift ended, Philippe approached her. Elena, I need you to know, if you want to press charges, file a complaint, the restaurant will support you fully. What he did was harassment, plain and simple. Thank you, Felipe, but I think Mr. Sterling is learning his lesson through other means. Philippe nodded slowly. Your grandfather is an impressive man, but you're even more impressive. To stand there and take that abuse, knowing you had the power to destroy him at any moment, but choosing to wait, to let him reveal himself fully. That takes a strength I'm not sure I possess. That evening, Elena met her grandfather at his office in the Kowalczyk Technologies building, a gleaming structure in University City that stood as a testament to immigrant ambition. Viktor was in his private conference room, the walls lined with patents, awards, and photographs spanning decades of innovation. How did the rest of the meeting go? Elena asked, settling into one of the leather chairs that had witnessed countless negotiations. Viktor poured them both tea from a samovar that belonged to his grandmother, one of the few family heirlooms that had survived their journey to America. Mr. Sterling has agreed to all our terms, the cultural transformation requirements, the diversity mandates, the employee protection clauses, everything. He folded that easily?
He had no choice. His board was already questioning his leadership after 3 quarters of losses. When Richard Brennan returned and reported what had happened, they called an emergency meeting. Sterling is CEO in name only now. He'll be replaced within 6 months as part of the merger agreement. Elena felt a complex mix of emotions, satisfaction at justice served, but also a hollow feeling that one man's downfall wouldn't change the system that created and enabled him. "You're thinking it's not enough," Viktor observed, reading her expression with the ease of long familiarity. How many Marcus Sterlings are out there? How many people face that kind of treatment every day without recourse? Viktor was quiet for a moment, sipping his tea. "When I started my first company, a supplier told me to my face that he didn't do business with Polacks. I could have gotten angry, could have fought him directly. Instead,
I became his biggest competitor and eventually bought his company. Not out of revenge, but to prove that merit matters more than prejudice. But that took years, decades. Yes, change always does. But look at what we accomplished today. Not just humbling one bigot, but setting new standards that will affect thousands of employees. Requiring training that will educate hundreds of managers. Creating policies that will protect vulnerable workers for years to come. It's not everything, but it's not nothing either. They worked late into the night, reviewing the merger documents, adding provisions, strengthening protections. Elena drew on everything she'd learned at Wharton, every insight from her restaurant work, every piece of wisdom inherited from generations of survivors and fighters. At one point, Viktor pulled out an old photograph, his grandfather at his forge, the same one Elena had in her apartment. He would be amazed by all this, Viktor said softly. His granddaughter and great-great-granddaughter, reshaping American industry, using the name he refused to change as a sword and shield both. Do you think he would have handled it the way we did? No, Viktor said with a slight smile. His grandfather would have punched Sterling in the face. Different times called for different methods. We fight with contracts and clauses now, but the principle is the same. Never let them make you small. As midnight approached, they finally finished their work. The merger agreement was transformed from a simple business transaction into a manifesto for corporate responsibility. It would be studied in business schools, Elena realized, discussed in boardrooms, perhaps even inspire legislation. There's something else, Viktor said as they prepared to leave. The board of Sterling Industrials wants you to join as a special advisor on corporate culture during the transition. Elena's eyebrows shot up. They want the waitress Sterling insulted to help run his company? They want the brilliant young woman who showed grace under pressure and whose insights could save their company. The irony is just a bonus. I'm still in school. It would be part-time, mostly advisory, and it would give you a chance to implement these changes personally, to make sure they stick. Elena considered it, the opportunity to reshape Sterling Industries from the inside, to turn it from a bastion of old boy privilege into something better. It was tempting. But more than that, it was a chance to honor everyone who'd ever been dismissed, belittled, or overlooked because of their name, their accent, their appearance. I'll do it, she decided, but I keep my restaurant job too. Viktor laughed, a rich sound that filled the conference room. Of course you will. The board will just have to schedule around your shifts at Bernardin. As they left the building, stepping into the cool Philadelphia night, Elena felt the weight of the day settling on her shoulders. It had begun with her alarm at 4:47 a.m., preparing for what she thought would be an ordinary day of classes and service. Instead, she'd become part of a story that was already spreading through the business world. The CEO who mocked a waitress's name and discovered she held his future in her hands. But Elena knew the real work was just beginning. Changing policies was one thing, changing hearts and minds was another. Sterling Industries had decades of toxic culture to overcome, generations of employees who'd been taught that cruelty was strength and compassion was weakness. Her phone buzzed with a text from her mother. Your father told me everything. Remember what I always say. The best revenge is revolutionary success. Make them better than they ever thought they could be. The emergency board meeting at Sterling Industries convened at 7 a.m. sharp the following morning in the 42nd floor boardroom, a space designed to intimidate with its floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking Philadelphia's skyline. Marcus Sterling sat at the head of the mahogany table, but his usual commanding presence had evaporated like morning dew. His shoulders hunched forward, his hands trembled slightly as he lifted his coffee cup, and dark circles under his eyes suggested a sleepless night spent in damage control.
The board members filed in with unusual solemnity. There was Harrison Walsh, the lead independent director, whose 3 decades at Goldman Sachs had taught him to smell blood in the water from miles away. Dorothy Chen, the former federal judge who joined the board to improve governance, wore an expression that could have frozen hellfire. James Hartley, Thomas Morrison, and Sarah Blackwood, each a titan in their own industry, took their seats with the careful movements of people approaching an unexploded bomb. Richard Brennan, who'd spent the night preparing a presentation no one wanted to give, connected his laptop to the projection system with hands that barely shook. The first slide appeared on the screen, a screenshot of a social media post that had already garnered 2 million views. The video, though slightly grainy, clearly showed Marcus Sterling's interaction with Elena Kowalczyk, his mocking tone audible even through the restaurant's ambient noise. "Before we begin," Marcus started, his voice lacking its usual authority, "I want to state that the interaction has been taken out of context." "Stop!" Dorothy Chen's voice cut through his words like a judicial gavel. "We've all seen the video, Marcus. We've also received 17 complaints from Sterling Industries employees citing similar behavior over the past 5 years. Complaints that HR apparently buried at your directive." The room fell silent except for the hum of the air conditioning and the distant sound of traffic far below. Richard clicked to the next slide, a graph showing Sterling Industries' declining market share, hemorrhaging talent, and most damning, a comparison with Kowalczyk Technologies' growth trajectory. "The young woman you humiliated," Harrison Walsh said, his voice deceptively mild, "is not only Viktor Kowalczyk's granddaughter, but also the architect of the merger terms we're now forced to accept. She spent last night adding provisions that will cost us approximately $40 million in cultural transformation initiatives." $40 million? Marcus's voice cracked. "That's just the direct costs," Sarah Blackwood added, consulting her tablet. "The indirect costs, mandatory retraining for all management, third-party culture audits, the establishment of an independent ethics board could double that figure. And that's assuming we can even salvage this merger." Richard clicked to the next slide, showing Elena's credentials, Princeton, Wharton, her published papers, her advisory roles with 3 successful startups. "This is who you chose to belittle based on her surname. A polyglot with an IQ of 157 who turned down offers from every major consulting firm to help run her family's empire." "I didn't know," Marcus began. "That's exactly the point. You didn't know because you didn't care to know. You saw a server with a Polish name and made assumptions that revealed not just personal prejudice, but a fundamental failure of leadership. How many brilliant people have we lost because of this attitude? How many innovations have we missed because you've created a culture where only certain types of people feel valued?" Thomas Morrison, who'd been silent until now, cleared his throat. "I've been doing some research since last night. Do you know what the name Kowalczyk means in the tech industry? They hold over 300 patents. Their AI division alone is worth more than our entire company. And Viktor Kowalczyk has options. Samsung, Intel, and Apple have all made overtures. We need them. They don't need us. So we grovel. We prostrate ourselves because I made one mistake." "One mistake?" Dorothy Chen's voice rose. "Marcus, I've spent the night reviewing complaints. Maria Santos from accounting. You asked if her name was even legal in a staff meeting. Raj Patel from engineering. You've consistently mispronounced his name for 3 years, in quotes, as a joke. Should I continue?" The boardroom door opened, and Viktor Kowalczyk entered, followed by Elena, and, surprisingly, a woman Marcus didn't recognize, an elegant Asian-American woman in her 50s wearing a judge's pin on her lapel. "I hope you don't mind, but I've brought my daughter, Dr. Anna Kowalczyk. She's taking a brief break from arguing cases before the Third Circuit to help with this transition." Anna Kowalczyk's presence changed the room's dynamic instantly. Several board members recognized her. She'd successfully argued 3 discrimination cases that had reshaped corporate liability law. Her involvement signaled that this wasn't just about a merger. It was about fundamental transformation or potential litigation. Elena took a seat at the table, setting down a leather portfolio with quiet confidence. She was dressed differently than the day before, a tailored business suit that probably cost more than Marcus's monthly mortgage. But her expression held the same steady dignity she'd maintained while being humiliated. "Miss Kowalczyk," Harrison Walsh began formally, "we owe you an apology."
"I don't want apologies," Elena interrupted, her voice calm but firm. "I want change. Real, systemic, measurable change." Sterling Industries has a cancer of prejudice and casual cruelty that starts at the top and metastasizes throughout the organization. We can either cure it or let the company die. She opened her portfolio and distributed bound documents to each board member. These are the revised merger terms. You'll find them extensive but non-negotiable. Every provision is designed to transform Sterling Industries from a company that tolerates discrimination into one that actively promotes equity and inclusion. Marcus reached for a copy, his hand freezing as Elena's eyes met his. "You don't get one," she said simply. "You're going to sit there and listen while the adults decide your company's future." The insult, a reversal of his own dismissive treatment, landed with surgical precision. Several board members shifted uncomfortably, but no one defended him. Anna Kowalczyk stood, her presence commanding despite her modest height. "Let me be clear about the legal situation. The video of yesterday's incident, combined with the pattern of documented complaints, exposes Sterling Industries to significant liability. We could pursue a hostile takeover backed by discrimination lawsuits that would destroy your share value. Instead, we're offering a path to redemption, but that path requires Marcus Sterling's immediate resignation as CEO." "You can't," Marcus started, half rising from his chair. "Actually, we can," Dorothy said coolly. "I've been in touch with our major shareholders since last night. They're unanimous. Either you resign, or they'll call for an emergency shareholder vote to remove you. Your choice." Elena watched Marcus process this information, seeing the exact moment when he understood his empire was crumbling. But rather than satisfaction, she felt a deep sadness for the waste of it all. The talent driven away, the innovation stifled, the human potential squandered on the altar of one man's ego. "There's something else," Elena said, pulling out her phone. "This morning I received these." She connected her phone to the presentation system, displaying email after email. These are from Sterling Industries employees who saw the video. They're sharing their own stories, years of microaggressions, passed-over promotions, hostile work environments. 47 emails since midnight. She scrolled through them, letting the board see names, departments, dates. The pattern was undeniable and damning. Maria Santos writes, "I've worked in accounting for 7 years, never missed a deadline, never made an error, but Mr. Sterling still calls me Marina half the time and jokes about my fiesta approach to numbers." Raj Patel writes, "I have 3 patents that have saved this company millions, but in meetings, Mr. Sterling introduces me as our diverse hire rather than our lead engineer." Michael O'Brien writes, "My Irish name is apparently acceptable, but Mr. Sterling told me to my face that I was lucky I didn't have one of those unpronounceable names like the Polish contractors." Each testimony was another nail in the coffin of Marcus's defense. The board members' faces reflected a mix of anger, embarrassment, and calculation of legal liability. "We could make this a class action," Anna said, conversationally, as if discussing the weather. "The damages would be substantial." "What do you want?" Harrison Walsh asked directly. Viktor leaned forward. "We want Sterling Industries to become a case study in transformation. We want to prove that even the most toxic culture can be reformed with the right leadership and commitment." Elena has agreed to oversee this transformation as special advisor for cultural innovation. "I'm still in business school," Elena added with a slight smile, "so I'll need to work around my class schedule and my shifts at Le Bernardin. I'm keeping that job as a reminder of what respectful service actually looks like." Thomas Morrison laughed, breaking the tension slightly. "You want us to schedule board meetings around your waiting tables?" "Yes," Elena said simply. "If Sterling Industries wants to understand its workforce, it needs leadership that understands what it's like to be on your feet for 8 hours, to depend on tips, to be treated as invisible by people who think their wealth makes them superior." "This is insane," Marcus muttered. "No," Dorothy said sharply. "What's insane is that we let you create a culture so toxic that we need a 23-year-old to teach us basic human decency. I motion for Marcus Sterling's immediate removal as CEO and the acceptance of all merger terms as presented."
Seconded, Harrison said immediately.
The vote was unanimous, except for Marcus, who sat in stunned silence as his career evaporated. The man who'd walked into Le Bernardin 24 hours ago believing himself untouchable was now untethered, floating in the wreckage of his own making. "There's one more thing," Elena said as the meeting prepared to adjourn. "Mr. Sterling needs to complete the same diversity and inclusion training as every other employee, but he'll do it in a special cohort, with the employees he's discriminated against. Maria, Raj, and the others have agreed to be his training partners, to help him understand the impact of his words and actions." "That's humiliating," Marcus protested weakly. "No," Elena corrected. "Humiliating is having your name mocked in front of a restaurant full of people. This is education. And if you complete it successfully, if you genuinely show growth and understanding, Kowalczyk Technologies will write a letter of recommendation for your next position. We believe in redemption, Mr. Sterling, but redemption requires work." As the board members filed out, each stopping to shake Elena's and Viktor's hands, Marcus remained seated, staring at his hands. Richard Brennan lingered, torn between loyalty to his boss and recognition of necessity. "Richard," Elena addressed him, "you sat there yesterday and said nothing while Mr. Sterling humiliated me, but I also saw your discomfort. The question is, were you complicit or just cowardly?" Richard flushed. I should have spoken up. I'm sorry." "Apologies or words. I'm interested in actions. Will you help implement these changes or will you resist them?" "I'll help," Richard said quietly. "I have a daughter. She's studying engineering. I wouldn't want her to face what you faced yesterday." Elena nodded. "Then you'll be part of the transition team. Your first assignment is to compile a complete record of every discrimination complaint that was buried or ignored. We need to know the full scope of what we're dealing with." As Richard left, only Marcus, Elena, Viktor, and Anna remained in the boardroom. The morning sun had risen higher, casting long shadows across the polished table. Marcus finally looked up, his eyes red-rimmed and defeated. "Why didn't you just destroy me immediately? You had the power. Why let me humiliate myself first?" Elena considered the question carefully. "Because immediate destruction teaches nothing. You needed to fully display your prejudice, to have it documented and witnessed, so that there could be no denial, no rationalization later. Change requires acknowledgement of what needs changing." "You planned this," Marcus said, a note of bewildered respect creeping into his voice. "The whole thing?" Viktor shook his head. "We planned for the possibility. Elena working at the restaurant wasn't a trap. It was her choice to understand all levels of business. That you walked into that restaurant and chose to mock her name, that was entirely your decision. We simply allowed consequences to follow." Anna pulled out a legal document. "This is your resignation letter and a comprehensive non-disparagement agreement. You'll receive your contractual severance, but only if you complete the remediation program Elena outlined. Any public criticism of the merger or the transformation process will void the agreement." Marcus signed without reading, his hand moving mechanically across the pages. As he prepared to leave, he turned back to Elena. "That pendant you wear, the hammer. I noticed it yesterday, but didn't understand." Elena touched the silver hammer at her throat. "It belonged to my great-great-grandfather, the blacksmith whose name you found so amusing. He made it himself, wore it every day as a reminder that dignity comes from work, not from wealth." "I've never made anything, only acquired things others made." It was perhaps the most honest thing he'd ever said. Elena saw him clearly then, a hollow man who'd built his identity on superiority without substance, whose cruelty came from a deep well of personal inadequacy. "It's not too late to learn," Elena offered. "The training program includes workshops where executives work alongside entry-level employees on actual projects. You might discover you're capable of creation, not just acquisition." Marcus left without responding, his footsteps echoing in the hallway. The three Kowalczyks remained, sitting in comfortable silence as the city hummed with life 42 floors below. "You showed him mercy," Anna observed to her daughter. "More than he deserved."
Mercy isn't for him. It's for everyone who works here, who needs to see that change is possible, that people can grow. If we just destroy and replace, we perpetuate the cycle. But if we transform... You really believe Sterling can change? Viktor asked.
I don't know, but I believe the 47 people who wrote to me deserve the chance to work in a company that values them. I believe Maria Santos deserves to be called by her actual name. I believe Raj Patel's innovations deserve recognition beyond being a diversity statistic. Her phone buzzed. Philippe from Bernardin. I heard the news. Your shift is covered if you need it, but we'd love to have you if you can make it. Elena smiled. I need to go. I have the lunch shift. You're serious about keeping the restaurant job? Anna asked. Dead serious. Every time I start to feel too comfortable in boardrooms, I need to remember what it feels like to have tired feet and difficult customers. It's too easy to lose perspective from the 42nd floor. 2 hours later, Elena was back in her server's uniform, carrying trays and taking orders. The lunch crowd was different today. Several faces she recognized from the business world, clearly there to catch a glimpse of the woman who'd brought down Marcus Sterling. Table for one? She asked a young woman in a conservative business suit who looked nervous. Actually, I wanted to thank you, the woman said quietly. I work at Sterling Industries in IT. Mr. Sterling once asked me if my name, Shapansky, was a computer glitch. I've been thinking about quitting for months. And now? Now I want to stay and be part of the change. If it's real, will it be real? Elena thought of the mountain of work ahead, the entrenched attitudes, the institutional resistance they'd face. But she also thought of her great-great-grandfather at his forge, shaping metal through heat and pressure and time. Yes, she said firmly, it will be real. And people like you, people who've endured and survived, you're the ones who will make it real. The lunch rush continued, and Elena found herself serving a table of Sterling Industries middle managers who'd come to see her. They were awkward, uncertain, clearly struggling with how to interact with someone who was simultaneously their server and their future board advisor. Just treat me like you'd treat any professional providing a service, with respect. It's not complicated. One of them, a woman about Marcus's age, asked, How do we fix a culture that's been broken for so long? Elena set down their water glasses thoughtfully. The same way you eat an elephant, one bite at a time. Every interaction is a choice. Every meeting is an opportunity to do better. Every hiring decision, every promotion, every casual conversation can either reinforce the old culture or build a new one. As she walked away, she heard them discussing her words, debating implementation strategies. The change was already beginning, one conversation at a time. That evening, a town hall was called at Sterling Industries. The entire Philadelphia headquarters staff, over 2,000 people, gathered in the main auditorium. Elena stood backstage with Viktor, Anna, and surprisingly, Richard Brennan, who'd spent the afternoon compiling the discrimination complaints as requested. There are 137 documented incidents over the past 5 years that we know of, probably many more that were never reported. You will present those findings, Elena decided. The employees need to hear it from someone who was part of the old system, acknowledging its failures. Richard nodded, swallowing hard. I've been complicit through silence. It's time to be accountable. They walked onto the stage to uncertain applause. The employees didn't know whether to trust this change, whether it was real or just another corporate restructuring that would change nothing. Elena took the microphone, her voice carrying across the packed auditorium. My name is Elena Kowalczyk. Yesterday, your former CEO mocked my name as unpronounceable, foreign, inferior. Many of you have experienced similar treatment.
I'm here to tell you that era ends now. She introduced the transformation plan. Each initiative met with growing enthusiasm. When she announced the minimum wage increase to $25 per hour for all employees, including contractors and service staff, the applause was thunderous. But Elena continued, raising her hand for quiet. This isn't just about money. It's about dignity. It's about ensuring that every person who works here, from the janitor to the general counsel, is valued for their contribution. Maria Santos, the accounting manager whose name Marcus had consistently gotten wrong, stood up. How do we know this isn't just PR? How do we know things will really change? Elena looked directly at her. Because you're going to help lead the change, Maria. I'm establishing employee advisory councils with real power, reporting directly to the board. You've endured the worst of the old culture. You're uniquely qualified to help build the new one.
One by one, employees stood to share their experiences, their hopes, their skepticism. Elena listened to each one, taking notes, acknowledging pain while focusing on the future. It was exhausting and exhilarating in equal measure. Near the end, an older janitor raised his hand. "Miss Kowalczyk, I've worked here for 23 years. Mr. Sterling never once acknowledged my existence. Will the new leadership be any different?" Elena stepped down from the stage and walked up the aisle to where he stood. "What's your name?" "Samuel Washington." "Mr. Washington, in the new Sterling Industries, every employee will have lunch with leadership at least once a year. Not performative meetings, but real conversations about your work, your insights, your needs. You've been here 23 years. You probably understand this company's operations better than most executives. It's time someone asked for your perspective." The town hall ended with cautious optimism. Change had been promised before, but never with such specific commitments, never with such personal investment from leadership. 6 months after the confrontation at Bernardin, Sterling Industries looked like a different company. The gleaming headquarters had been redesigned to be more inclusive. Prayer rooms for various faiths, lactation rooms for new mothers, meditation spaces for mental health breaks. The executive floor, once a fortress of mahogany and exclusivity, now hosted open office hours where any employee could drop in to speak with leadership. Elena stood in what had been Marcus Sterling's office, now transformed into a collaborative workspace with glass walls and modular furniture. The imposing desk had been replaced with a round table that put everyone on equal footing. The wall of vanity photographs showing Marcus with various dignitaries had given way to a display celebrating employee innovations, Raj Patel's patents, Maria Santos's cost-saving algorithmic improvements, even Samuel Washington's suggestion for a more efficient cleaning supply system that saved the company thousands monthly. "The quarterly reports are in," Richard Brennan announced, entering with a tablet and a smile that would have seemed foreign on his face 6 months ago. "For the first time in 3 years, we're showing growth across all sectors." Elena reviewed the numbers, but her attention was drawn to the employee satisfaction scores, up 40%. The retention rate for diverse talent had doubled. The number of internal innovations had tripled. "It's working," Richard said, unnecessarily, his voice tinged with something like wonder. "I've been in corporate America for 20 years, and I've never seen transformation like this." Through the glass walls, Elena could see the morning shift arriving, a diverse mix of people chatting in various languages, their ease with each other a sharp contrast to the segregated departments of the Sterling era. She spotted Maria Santos talking animatedly with a new hire, using the mentorship program that paired experienced employees with newcomers regardless of hierarchy. "Has Marcus completed his training?" Elena asked. Richard's expression grew complicated. "He has. Yesterday was his final session. He requested to speak with you." Elena had been expecting this. Marcus Sterling had spent 6 months in intensive diversity and inclusion training, working alongside the very people he'd discriminated against. Reports from the sessions had been mixed, resistance at first, then gradual acknowledgement, and finally something that might have been genuine understanding.
Send him in at noon, Elena decided. I have the employee lunch forum at 1, and he should hear what his former employees are building without him. The morning flew by in a blur of meetings, each one demonstrating the new Sterling Industries culture. The marketing team, now led by a black woman who'd been passed over for promotion 5 times under Marcus, presented a campaign celebrating American diversity that had already won industry recognition. The engineering department, with Raj Patel finally recognized as lead innovator, had filed 12 new patents. The accounting team, with Maria Santos at its helm, had identified $15 million in savings through ethical supplier relationships. At noon precisely, Marcus Sterling knocked on the glass door. The man who entered looked older, humbler, worn down by 6 months of confronting his own prejudices. His expensive suit had been replaced with a simple business-casual outfit, and his characteristic swagger had given way to uncertain steps. "Miss Kowalczyk," he began formally, then caught himself. "Elena, thank you for seeing me." Elena gestured to a chair at the round table. "You've completed the program. Dr. Morrison says you showed genuine growth."
Dr. Keisha Morrison, the psychologist who designed the remediation program, had reported that Marcus's transformation seemed authentic, if incomplete. "He understands intellectually what he did wrong," she'd written. "Whether that translates to emotional understanding remains to be seen." "I wanted to apologize," Marcus said, the words clearly difficult. "Not the corporate apology I gave before, but a real one. I've spent 6 months listening to stories of people whose careers I damaged, whose dignity I dismissed. Maria Santos showed me a photo of her daughter, told me how she used to cry because kids at private school mocked her mother's accent, the same accent I mocked. Raj Patel explained how my diverse hire comments made him doubt his own achievements, even with 3 patents to his name." Elena listened without responding, her expression neutral. Marcus continued, his voice rougher. "Samuel Washington, the janitor, he has a master's degree in engineering. Did you know that? He couldn't get hired in his field in the 1970s because of his race, so he took whatever work he could find. He's been cleaning the offices of less qualified people for decades, and I never even knew his name." "And now?" Elena prompted. "Now I understand that I've been part of a system that wastes human talent. Samuel has ideas that could revolutionize our facilities management. Maria's innovations have saved millions. Raj's patents are the foundation of our future, and I almost destroyed all of it because I couldn't see past their names, their accents, their skin color." Elena watched him carefully. "Understanding is the first step. What's the second?" "Making amends. I've applied to teach diversity training at other companies, unpaid. I want to prevent other executives from making my mistakes, and I'm starting a scholarship fund for first-generation college students with difficult names." Through the glass wall, Elena could see employees gathering for the lunch forum, the monthly meeting where any worker could propose ideas directly to leadership. Samuel Washington was there, animated as he discussed his latest efficiency proposal with the head of operations. "There's something else," Marcus said quietly. "I want to thank you. You could have destroyed me completely. Instead, you gave me a chance to become better. It's a gift I didn't deserve." Elena stood, smoothing her professional skirt. Today she was dressed as an executive, not a server, though she still worked her weekend shifts at Le Bernardin. "Everyone deserves the chance to grow, Marcus. The question is whether they take it." As he left, Elena felt the weight of her grandfather's words from that first day. Real change takes time, but it starts with holding people accountable while leaving room for redemption. The transformation of Sterling Industries had become a Harvard Business School case study, but for Elena, it was simply proof that dignity and respect weren't just moral imperatives, they were profitable ones.